The room fell into a heavy silence before the cameras even began rolling. Bright studio lights glared across polished glass tables, and a restless audience shifted in their seats, bracing for a showdown they could feel in their bones. This wasn't just another political exchange. It was a moment America would talk about for decades. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, smirking with the overconfidence of a man who believed the stage belonged to him. His posture was loud even when his words hadn't started. He fed on attention, every glance from the cameras fueling his ego, every whispered murmur in the crowd tightening his grip on the spotlight. And then Barack Obama entered. Calm, measured, almost too composed for the fiery setting. His stride carried quiet authority, the kind that doesn't demand the room but naturally claims it. The contrast was magnetic. One man thriving on chaos, the other embodying dignity in silence. The clash of these two figures promised a collision of worlds: arrogance versus steadiness, noise versus truth. As the debate began, the first question barely finished echoing before Trump pounced. He lashed out with insults dressed as arguments, tossing half-truths in mockery like confetti. He laughed at his own jabs, glancing toward the crowd for validation, convinced his performance would be remembered as dominance. But Obama didn't flinch, not once. His face remained still, his eyes sharp, his hands resting in perfect stillness. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing something brewing beneath that quiet patience. It was as if Obama was holding a storm in his chest, waiting for the precise moment to release it. Then came the line. One single sentence, delivered without raising his voice, without breaking his rhythm. A sentence so precise, so piercing, that the room froze. Trump's smirk faltered, the audience gasped, and the internet within seconds began exploding with disbelief. People watching from their living rooms felt the electricity ripple through their screens. Hashtags were already forming. Clips were already being cut. Everyone knew they had just witnessed a live takedown. One so savage and sharp it would echo far beyond the night. But what no one expected was how deeply this one line would shake the very image Trump had built for himself. The moment that savage line left Obama's lips, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. The tension that had been simmering now boiled over. Viewers weren't just watching a debate anymore. They were watching history being written in real time. Yet to truly understand why this moment mattered, you have to step back and see the stakes that had been building long before that night. This wasn't simply Obama versus Trump. It was two visions of America colliding. On one side stood the embodiment of measured dignity, a leader who had faced racism, relentless criticism, and the burden of representing hope for millions. On the other, a man who thrived on spectacle, fueled by grievance and showmanship, wielding outrage like a weapon. For weeks leading up to this televised clash, the media hyped it as an ideological brawl. Networks rolled out countdown clocks. Anchors spoke of it as if it were a championship fight, and political pundits framed it as the showdown of the decade. People across the nation cleared their schedules to tune in. Even those who normally avoided politics felt the magnetic pull of this confrontation. Why? Because the nation itself was fractured. Conversations at dinner tables, in workplaces, in classrooms had grown toxic. Families split along party lines. Friends unfollowed each other online. America was teetering on the edge of something raw and dangerous. And this debate seemed to capture it all in one stage. Under one spotlight, Trump entered this arena confident that his usual tactics would work. Throw enough barbs, create enough noise, and dominate the room by sheer force of personality. It had worked before. It had carried him through rallies, interviews, and confrontations where others crumbled under the sheer chaos. He expected Obama to play defense, to dodge and explain, to absorb the blows. But this time was different. The weight of expectations on Obama's shoulders was massive. Millions were silently urging him to be the calm in the storm, to speak not just for himself, but for them, for those tired of being dismissed, insulted, and mocked by Trump's bombastic style. His silence at the beginning wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. Every second of restraint added fuel to the moment he would unleash his counterattack. The crowd could feel it. The viewers could sense it. And Trump, though he laughed and jeered, began to sense it too. Still, the danger was real. This wasn't just about witty comebacks or verbal sparring. The stakes here were about credibility, identity, and the moral soul of the country.
No.
If Obama faltered, it would reinforce the narrative Trump had crafted, that dignity was weakness, that arrogance could bulldoze integrity. But if Obama landed his strike with precision, it could ripple across the nation like a thunderclap. And when he finally spoke, when that one sentence carved through the air with surgical precision, the effect was seismic. Gasps echoed in the room, but the real eruption was happening in living rooms, on phones, on Twitter feeds lighting up with disbelief and awe. The line was more than a clapback. It was a statement, a mirror held up to Trump, exposing the cracks in his carefully curated image. And the deeper truth was this: America wasn't just reacting to a clever remark. It was reacting to the release of years of pent-up frustration. Because what followed that moment would prove this wasn't just a soundbite. It was the spark that set off a chain reaction unlike anything political television had seen before. But the real shock, the unraveling of Trump's persona, was only beginning. To understand why Obama's one-line hit with the force of an earthquake, you need to know the man it landed on. Donald Trump wasn't just another politician or television personality. He was a figure who had carefully built himself into a brand defined by bravado, conflict, and domination. For years, he thrived on the idea that he was untouchable, that no one could pierce the armor of spectacle he wore like a crown. Long before the cameras of that debate stage, Trump had been conditioning audiences to see him as larger than life. The real estate mogul turned reality TV star used every tool of performance to craft an image of success. Gold-plated towers, boardroom dismissals, the phrase, "you're fired," delivered with theatrical flair, all of it was a performance designed to blur the line between entertainment and power. But beneath the flash was a pattern: insult before substance, spectacle before truth. He knew that chaos could drown out criticism, that mockery could disarm opponents faster than reasoned arguments. He leaned on this formula again and again, and it worked. People either adored him for his bluntness or loathed him for his cruelty, but either way they couldn't stop watching. And in Trump's world, attention equaled victory. The same strategy carried into his political rise. He targeted not policies, but people. He reduced debates to playground brawls, tossing nicknames like punches: Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Little Marco. These jabs weren't clever policy critiques. They were tools of humiliation. He thrived on dragging opponents into the mud. Because in the mud, he was king. Yet there was always a shadow lurking behind his bombast, all whose projection of dominance critics pointed to contradictions. The self-proclaimed billionaire was riddled with bankruptcies. The self-proclaimed truth-teller was caught spinning lies that were debunked daily. The man who claimed to stand for strength often revealed fragility, lashing out at comedians, journalists, even everyday citizens who dared criticize him. That fragility is what made Obama's presence so dangerous for Trump. The two men had a history, and it was deeply personal. Years earlier, Trump had staked his political relevance on the birther conspiracy, a racist lie suggesting that Barack Obama wasn't truly American, that he was illegitimate as president. It wasn't just a political attack. It was an assault on Obama's very identity. Trump rode that lie into national headlines, laughing as it spread, basking in the chaos it caused. And now here they were, face to face, on live television. Trump had spent years trying to delegitimize Obama, painting him as weak, foreign, other. He had mocked his name, questioned his background, turned his presidency into a target for endless derision. To his supporters, this was proof of Trump's dominance. To his critics, it was proof of his cruelty. But cruelty has a cost. Every insult hurled, every conspiracy pushed, every arrogant performance had been adding weight to the mask Trump wore, and the cracks were starting to show. Audiences weren't just laughing anymore, they were questioning. Allies weren't just cheering anymore, some were calculating. The once unshakable brand was beginning to look fragile under the spotlight of truth. Still, Trump believed the formula would hold. He believed his usual tactics: louder voice, sharper insult, bigger stage presence would keep him on top. He believed no one, not even Barack Obama, could cut through the fortress of spectacle he had built. That's why the line hit with such devastating precision. It wasn't just a witty remark. It was a strike at the very foundation of Trump's persona. The audience didn't just hear Obama's words. They saw the smirk vanish. They saw the mask slip. They saw the man behind the performance caught off guard in real time. And when someone like Trump, who thrives on dominance, shows even a flicker of vulnerability, the illusion begins to collapse. The emperor who prided himself on always having the last word suddenly looked cornered. This was the moment his contradictions were exposed. The moment when arrogance collided with truth. And while the shock of that line reverberated, the true weight of it wouldn't be fully felt until the backstory of the other man. Obama himself unfolded before the world, because if Trump's story was about building a brand of dominance through spectacle, Obama's was about building dignity through struggle. And when those two stories met on one stage in one unforgettable night, only one of them could stand tall. If Trump's story was one of spectacle, Obama's was one of resilience. His rise didn't come from inherited wealth or television cameras. It came from navigating barriers that were designed to keep him out, from confronting a world that often doubted him before he even spoke. His backstory was not just biography, was the armor that would prepare him for the moment when he would face down Donald Trump. Live in front of millions. Barack Obama's journey began in the most unlikely of places, born to a Kenyan father and an American mother, raised in Hawaii, later spending formative years in Indonesia. His identity was stitched together from different continents, cultures, and histories. Too many, this was a source of skepticism. Too different, too foreign, not American enough. To Obama, it became his strength. From an early age, he learned to adapt, to listen, to bridge divides between worlds. As a boy, he wasn't handed privilege, was handed questions about race, belonging, an identity that many never have to confront. He grew up seeing his single mother work tirelessly, learning the value of sacrifice not through lectures, but through lived reality. Those sacrifices fueled his hunger to rise, not for fame, but for purpose. His academic path was the first sign of his extraordinary resilience, from community organizing on the streets of Chicago to Harvard Law School, where he became the first black president of the Harvard Law Review. Obama carved a space for himself where few thought he belonged. Each milestone wasn't just a personal victory. It was a rebuke to a society that often whispered, "You can't." But his defining strength wasn't intellect alone. It was empathy. In Chicago, working with struggling families, he saw the toll of poverty, injustice, and neglect. He didn't just talk about hope. He lived among people who desperately needed it. Those years grounded him, sharpening his understanding of what leadership truly meant. Not power for its own sake, but service, sacrifice, and the ability to lift others when they could not stand on their own. When he entered politics, it wasn't with the bluster of arrogance, but with the quiet conviction of someone carrying the weight of communities behind. His speeches became more than words, they were mirrors, reflecting the dreams and struggles of ordinary Americans. When he spoke of hope and change, people didn't just hear a politician's promise. They heard a man who had walked through storms and still believed in the light on the other side, of course. His rise was met with resistance. Opponents mocked his name, spread rumors about his faith, questioned his legitimacy at every turn. No one pushed that skepticism louder than Donald Trump, who amplified the birther lie. For Obama, it was more than an insult. It was an attempt to erase his very existence, to reduce his life's work to a conspiracy. But Obama's response was telling. He never descended into the mud. He never matched insult for insult. Instead, he embodied patience, composure, and quiet strength. He understood something vital. The louder his enemies shouted, the more powerful his calm became. By the time he stood on that debate stage, Obama carried not just his own story, but the weight of millions who had seen themselves in him. Immigrants, who worked long hours chasing the American dream. Families who had been told they didn't belong. Young people of color who looked at him and saw proof that the impossible was possible. And it was that quiet power that made his confrontation with Trump so seismic. For years, Trump had tried to delegitimize him, to brand him as other. Yet here stood Obama, calm, dignified, unapologetically himself, prepared not just to defend his legacy, but to deliver a truth so sharp it would cut through years of noise. What made the moment extraordinary wasn't only the line itself, but the history behind it. Every sacrifice, every insult endured, every struggle overcome had prepared him for this precise clash. It wasn't just about outwitting Trump. It was about embodying a different kind of strength, one rooted in grace, in empathy and resilience. The audience watching sensed it, even if they couldn't articulate it. They saw two Americas colliding on that stage, one built on arrogance, mockery, and entitlement. The other built on dignity, struggle, and service. When Obama spoke, it wasn't just Barack Obama the man, it was Barack Obama the symbol representing every person who had ever been told they weren't enough, and when his words landed, they carried the weight of that entire journey. Trump wasn't just facing a political opponent. He was facing a man whose life had been shaped by battles far harsher than insults, whose calm was forged in the fire of rejection and struggle. That's why the line cut so deep, because it wasn't a clever quip, was the voice of someone who had earned the right to stand unshaken in the face of arrogance. But the confrontation was far from over. If Obama's backstory explained his strength, what happened next would test it in real time. Because the debate was about to escalate, and the clash between these two men was only beginning to reach its boiling point. The line had landed, but the debate was far from finished. What followed was not silence, but fire. The insult had pierced Trump's armor, and his instinctive response was to double down. He leaned forward, voice rising, hands slicing the air as he launched into a barrage of attacks. He mocked Obama's policies, his tone dripping with sarcasm, his eyes flashing with frustration. It was the same strategy he had relied on for years. Overwhelm the stage with noise, force his opponent onto the defensive. But Obama refused to bite. He sat upright, shoulders relaxed, his gaze steady. While Trump's voice grew louder, Obama's presence grew larger in its calm. Every second he held that silence, the contrast deepened, arrogance flailing versus dignity holding firm. The audience felt the tension like static in the air, each exchange pulling them closer to the edge of their seats. The moderators struggled to rein in the chaos. Trump's interruptions were constant, his laughter sharp and mocking. He repeated, claims already disproven, weaving in half-truths and outright falsehoods. He seemed less interested in persuasion than in domination, turning the debate into a spectacle rather than a discussion. And yet, spectacle was beginning to work against him. Cameras caught the sweat on his brow, the sharpness of his gestures, the impatience in his tone. For a man who thrived on control, he was starting to look rattled. The smirk that had opened the evening was now replaced with clenched jaws and narrowed eyes. Meanwhile, Obama began to slowly shift gears. He didn't respond to every insult. He chose his moments. Each time he spoke, his words were crisp, deliberate, and devastatingly precise. He dismantled arguments with a surgeon's touch, exposing flaws without raising his voice. It was the art of contrast. While Trump swung wildly, Obama struck with accuracy. The audience could feel the balance tipping. Gasps followed each sharp rebuke. Laughter rippled when Obama exposed contradictions. For the first time, Trump wasn't the entertainer in command of the room. He was the one being entertained at. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Still, the tension kept rising. Trump, sensing control slipping away, turned more personal. He hurled accusations meant to sting, meant to provoke Obama into anger. He painted himself as the outsider, the victim of a system stacked against him, trying to flip the script on its head. But Obama didn't give him what he wanted. Instead, he let the insults hang in the air unanswered, as though they weren't worth his breath. His restraint became its own kind of attack, exposing Trump's desperation. Every pause, every quiet glance made Trump's shouting look smaller, more frantic, and then came the turning point. With the room charged, the crowd restless, and Trump growing visibly unhinged, Obama leaned forward for the first time. He adjusted his glasses, clasped his hands together, and prepared to deliver more than just rebuttals. The storm he had been holding back all night was about to break. The audience sensed it before he even spoke. Viewers at home felt it through their screens. The debate had escalated beyond politics. It was now a battle of composure versus chaos, truth versus spectacle. And as the moment reached its boiling point, Everyone watching knew the next words out of. Obama's mouth could decide the night. What happened next wouldn't just shift the debate. It would leave Donald Trump staring at a blow he never saw coming. The studio felt like it had stopped breathing. Trump's voice, so loud and insistent moments before, now echoed in the stillness like static after a storm. His last insult had trailed off into the air, his words hanging heavy but unanswered. All eyes turned to Obama, who hadn't moved much all night, his posture steady, his demeanor unshaken. And then slowly, he leaned forward. It wasn't just a physical gesture. It was a signal, the calm before the strike. His voice cut through the room, not loud but sharp, controlled, deliberate, and chillingly precise. Obama began, his tone measured, his eyes fixed directly on Trump. It's always fascinating to hear lectures about leadership from someone who's never been responsible for anyone but himself. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps. A few scattered laughs. The sudden energy of a room realizing they were witnessing something monumental. Trump's eyes flickered, his mouth twitching as if to fire back. But Obama didn't give him the chance. He continued, each word like a scalpel, cutting into the carefully crafted image Trump had built. You talk about strength as if it's the loudest person in the room, Obama said, pausing just long enough for the silence to sting, but real. Strength isn't measured in how many people you can insult. It's measured in how many people you can lift up. The audience erupted. Applause broke out, cheers rising over the clatter of cameras clicking. For a split second, Trump looked stunned, caught in the glare of a spotlight that exposed not his dominance, but his fragility. Obama didn't stop there. He pressed on, weaving his counterattack with surgical precision. He reminded the nation of the years Trump had spent questioning his legitimacy. For years, Obama said, his voice tightening with righteous resolve, you tried to convince this country that I didn't belong here, that my story, my name, my very identity somehow disqualified me. But here's the thing, you don't get to decide who belongs in America. America decides that. The people decide that. The studio thundered. Viewers at home felt goosebumps. For every immigrant family, every marginalized community, every person who had been told they were less than, Obama's words were more than a rebuttal. They were vindication. Trump shifted in his seat, his confidence unraveling. His smirk was gone, replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. He muttered into the microphone, trying to interject, but Obama kept control of the rhythm. He allowed just enough pause for Trump to stumble, then filled the space with clarity and conviction. Leadership, Obama continued, isn't about building towers with your name on them. It's about building bridges strong enough for others to cross. The contrast was devastating. Trump's empire of spectacle, gold-plated, loud, performative, looked small against Obama's vision of leadership rooted in service and resilience. Every sentence was crafted not just to dismantle Trump, but to elevate the idea of what America could and should be. And then came the line. The one that would ricochet across television screens, replayed in clips that went viral within minutes. Etched into political history, you can keep trying to tear people down, Obama said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. But the truth is, the only thing you've ever really built is your own ego. The room exploded. Applause shook the walls, the audience rising to their feet in unison. Some laughed, some cheered, others simply stared in awe. Even the moderators, usually stone-faced, struggled to mask their reactions. It was the kind of line that didn't just land, it detonated. Trump opened his mouth, searching for words, but nothing came. For the first time in memory, the man who prided himself on always having the last word sat in silence. His power, built on noise and dominance, had been shattered by a sentence so clear, so undeniable, that it left him speechless. But Obama wasn't finished. He closed his counterattack not with mockery, but with vision. This country doesn't need another performer, he said, his voice rising just slightly, enough to carry authority without shouting. It needs leaders who understand that dignity is stronger than arrogance, that hope is stronger than fear, and that service is stronger than self-interest. It wasn't just a mic drop moment. It was a reframing of the entire debate. Obama had transformed what could have been another exchange of insults into a moral reckoning. He positioned himself not just as Trump's opponent, but as the embodiment of values that transcended politics. The audience knew it. The nation watching knew it. Even Trump, shifting in his chair, glancing away from the cameras, seemed to know it. Something had broken. The mask had slipped. The ripple effect was immediate. Phones lit up with notifications. Twitter exploded. With hashtags, hashtag Obama mic drop, hashtag Trump speechless, hashtag leadership matters. Clips spread like wildfire, shared by celebrities, politicians, ordinary citizens. Memes appeared within minutes. Obama, with sunglasses, captions of the line plastered across. Glowing images. It wasn't just a debate moment. It was a cultural moment, and the brilliance of Obama's counterattack lay in its duality. He humiliated Trump without descending into cruelty. He dismantled arrogance while elevating dignity. He exposed a villain while inspiring millions who had been waiting for someone to finally say out loud what they had always felt. By the time the applause subsided, the debate stage felt transformed. The audience wasn't waiting for Trump's comeback anymore. They were waiting to see how far Obama's words would echo. And echo they did. Because what happened next wasn't just about the debate. It was about the shockwaves that rippled outward, shaking not just Trump, but the political landscape itself. The ballroom was still shaking from the echo of Obama's final punchline. But across the head table, Donald Trump sat frozen in a storm of silence. His jaw was tight, teeth clenched like a man biting down on his pride to stop it from spilling out. The cameras panned his face, and for a moment, the audience got a glimpse of something raw, not amusement, not embarrassment, but pure, simmering fury. This wasn't just another joke to Trump. This was a dagger plunged into his ego in front of Washington's elite and broadcast 2 million around the world. He had been humiliated on live television, stripped of the image he spent decades building. The real estate titan, the reality TV king, the brand who called himself bigger than life, all reduced to the butt of a single cutting line. But here's the thing about Donald Trump. Humiliation doesn't break him. It fuels him. Inside, the fire was already spreading. Every laugh he heard felt like another slap across the face. Every camera flash felt like another headline mocking him. And as Obama's smile lingered, Trump wasn't thinking about retreat. He was thinking about revenge. People at his table whispered nervously. Some tried to lighten the mood. Others avoided his gaze entirely. They knew what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a man annoyed at being teased. This was a man publicly challenged, stripped of his armor, and forced to sit there while the entire room feasted on his discomfort. And Trump never forgets humiliation. That night, while journalists scribbled down their stories and comedians sharpened their monologues for the next day's talk shows, Trump's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about how badly he'd been roasted. He was thinking about how he would flip the script, how he would turn the tables, how he would rise so high that one day the people laughing now would be forced to choke on their laughter. In that moment, a seed was planted. A seed watered not with humility, but with rage. Not with acceptance, but with defiance. The kind of rage that doesn't cool off. It grows, festers, transforms into ambition. And here's the irony. What Barack Obama thought was the night he delivered the perfect joke might have been the night he created his greatest rival. Because sitting in that ballroom, under the blinding chandeliers, Donald Trump wasn't planning on being the punchline anymore. Was planning on becoming the headline. The cameras caught the steel in his eyes. Not the look of a man defeated, but the look of a man already plotting his next move. Washington laughed. The world laughed. But Trump, he was already imagining a stage where no one could laugh at him again, only applaud, and history would later show. That night didn't break him. It forged him. The ballroom was still shaking from the echo of Obama's final punchline. But across the head table, Donald Trump sat frozen in a storm of silence. His jaw was tight, teeth clenched like a man biting down on his pride to stop it from spilling out. The cameras panned his face, and for a moment, the audience got a glimpse of something raw, not amusement, not embarrassment, but pure, simmering fury. This wasn't just another joke to Trump. This was a dagger plunged into his ego in front of Washington's elite and broadcast 2 million around the world. He had been humiliated on live television, stripped of the image he spent decades building. The real estate titan, the reality TV king, the brand who called himself bigger than life, all reduced to the butt of a single cutting line. But here's the thing about Donald Trump. Humiliation doesn't break him. It fuels him. Inside, the fire was already spreading. Every laugh he heard felt like another slap across the face. Every camera flash felt like another headline mocking him. And as Obama's smile lingered, Trump wasn't thinking about retreat. He was thinking about revenge. People at his table whispered nervously. Some tried to lighten the mood. Others avoided his gaze entirely. They knew what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a man annoyed at being teased. This was a man publicly challenged, stripped of his armor, and forced to sit there while the entire room feasted on his discomfort. And Trump never forgets humiliation. That night, while journalists scribbled down their stories and comedians sharpened their monologues for the next day's talk shows, Trump's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about how badly he'd been roasted. He was thinking about how he would flip the script, how he would turn the tables, how he would rise so high that one day the people laughing now would be forced to choke on their laughter. In that moment, a seed was planted. A seed watered not with humility, but with rage. Not with acceptance, but with defiance. The kind of rage that doesn't cool off, it grows, festers, transforms into ambition. And here's the irony. What Barack Obama thought was the night he delivered the perfect joke might have been the night he created his greatest rival. Because sitting in that ballroom, under the blinding chandeliers, Donald Trump wasn't planning on being the punchline anymore. He was planning on becoming the headline. The cameras caught the steel in his eyes. Not the look of a man defeated, but the look of a man already plotting his next move. Washington laughed. The world laughed. But Trump, he was already imagining a stage where no one could laugh at him again, only applaud, and history would later show. That night didn't break him. It forged him. The moment Obama's words landed, the political arena was shaken to its core. The cameras didn't just capture a clever jab. They immortalized a turning point. For Donald Trump, the line wasn't just humiliating, it was catastrophic. Within hours, the soundbite was everywhere. Every news station replayed it on loop, every late-night comedian weaponized it, and every political commentator dissected it like it was a State of the Union address. What made it worse for Trump was not just the insult itself, but how effortlessly Obama delivered it. Calm, measured, almost amused, like a teacher correcting a child. That contrast magnified the humiliation. Trump, a man who built his persona on dominance and control, suddenly looked small, cornered, and stripped of power. Twitter exploded. Memes were created within minutes. One showed Obama dropping a microphone. Another had Trump's face photoshopped onto a boxer who'd just been knocked out in the first round. Hashtags like hashtag Obama owned Trump, hashtag Savage Line, and hash Trump humiliated trended worldwide. For a man obsessed with the image, this was a nightmare he couldn't escape. Cable news panels ate it up. On CNN, analysts debated whether this was the moment Trump's aura of invincibility cracked. On MSNBC, commentators laughed openly at his reaction. Even Fox News, usually protective of Trump, struggled to spin it. Their hosts stumbled. Through excuses, suggesting Obama had been disrespectful, but the damage was already done. The clip spoke louder than any defense. Trump himself could not let it go. The following morning, instead of ignoring the humiliation, he raged on. Social media. Al Cap's tweets, angry rants, and desperate attempts to regain control flooded his feed. Every response only kept the story alive. Every word he typed dragged him deeper into the quicksand of ridicule. Behind closed doors, reports suggested. Trump was furious with his advisors. He demanded to know why no one had prepared him, why no one had warned him that Obama might take the stage with such a lethal line. Staffers whispered that the former president spent hours replaying the clip, seething, unable to accept how thoroughly he had been dismantled. Meanwhile, Obama's team barely reacted. To them, it was just another speech, another moment in his long history of sharp comebacks. But to the public, it was unforgettable. One sentence had managed to puncture the carefully constructed armor of Donald Trump, and the world was reveling in the spectacle. The fallout was more than entertainment. Strategists pointed out that this humiliation carried real consequences. Trump's opponents smelled blood. They knew his ego couldn't withstand repeated blows like this. And they started sharpening their attacks, mimicking Obama's style. of calm, cutting precision. What began as a viral clip was quickly becoming a roadmap for dismantling Trump's bravado. The media frenzy turned the incident into a cultural touchstone. Years later, people still reference that one savage line. It wasn't just political theater. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Obama hadn't just defeated Trump in that moment. He had reshaped the narrative of power, proving that sometimes the sharpest weapon isn't volume or aggression, but wit delivered with perfect timing. By the end of the week, it was clear. This wasn't a story that would fade. It was a scar on Trump's public image, a wound reopened every time someone replayed the clip. For millions watching, it was the moment the world saw the mask slip and the myth of Trump's untouchable persona cracked wide open. The lights of that night have long faded, the applause has long quieted, and the cameras have long been switched off. Yet, that single savage line from Barack Obama continues to echo in political memory, a line that didn't just humiliate Donald Trump in the moment but carved itself into the narrative of modern American politics. This wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just clever timing. It was a surgical strike, one that exposed the fragile armor of a man who thrives on dominance but recoils at mockery. Obama, with his calm composure, reminded the nation that words, when sharpened like blades, can wound deeper than any scandal, any policy fight, any political attack ad. Trump could brush off critics. He could bulldoze journalists. He could dismiss opponents with insults. But this was different. This was the President of the United States, standing at the pinnacle of cultural power, turning the nation's laughter into Trump's personal nightmare. And history proves the wound never really healed. In interviews years later, Trump's associates would privately admit that he never forgot that night. Smirk, the humiliation, the roar of the crowd at his expense, it haunted him. Even argue that his decision to run for president in 2016, against all odds, was fueled by a single desire: revenge. If true, that means Obama's one-liner didn't just entertain the room. It altered the trajectory of American politics. Think about that. One moment, one joke, one savage line may have been the spark that set fire to an entire political movement. Without it, would Trump have pushed so hard? Would he have been so determined to claw his way into the Oval Office? History isn't written in certainties, but legacies are built on defining moments, and this, without question, was one of them. For Obama, it became part of his legend, the cool, unflappable president who could dismantle his loudest critic with a smile. For Trump, it became a scar, a reminder that his greatest vulnerability wasn't policy or power, but ridicule. For America, it became a story, a parable of how pride and humiliation can collide to shape the destiny of a nation. Long after both men leave the stage, people will still replay that clip. They'll watch the crowd erupt, they'll see Trump's face tighten, and they'll hear Obama's words echo like a prophecy. That's the mark of a true legacy, not just living in the moment, but changing what comes after it. So when we talk about political turning points, we can point to elections, to wars, to scandals. But sometimes history is rewritten in laughter. Sometimes it's not the thunder of speeches, but the precision of a single line that shifts the balance. And on that night, Barack Obama delivered one of those lines, one that humiliated Donald Trump, one that thrilled a nation, and one that will forever live as a defining moment in the theater of American politics.